She never expected the quiet afternoon to break her life apart. For years, she had kept her world small and predictable. She lived in a modest neighborhood where every house had the same white fences, the same trimmed hedges, and the same slow rhythm of life. She worked part-time at a small bakery, walked home each day with a warm loaf for dinner, and spent the rest of her time with her daughter, who was the only part of her past and present that made perfect sense. She had grown used to this simple routine. It helped her forget everything she had worked hard to leave behind. She wanted a peaceful life, far away from the training grounds, missions, and secrets that used to follow her. The world she came from had no space for softness, and she wanted her daughter to grow up without any of that weight. She never bragged, never talked about her past, and never allowed herself to slip back into old habits. Her daughter was the center of her world, bright, curious, always humming some little tune she made up on the spot. They shared their mornings at the kitchen table, drawing silly cartoons on scrap paper, whispering their plans for the day. There was nothing complicated about their life, nothing dramatic. That peaceful simplicity was something she protected more fiercely than anyone around her could ever guess. But all it took was a single afternoon to shatter that calm. She had just stepped into the kitchen to take a tray of fresh cookies out of the oven when she heard a car pull up outside. She didn't think much of it at first. The neighbors often had guests stopping by. But then she heard firm knocks on the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just too official, too firm. The kind of knock that made her chest tighten before she even knew why. Her daughter peeked up from the living room, where she had been building a small tower out of wooden blocks. "Who is it?" she asked with her little head tilted. "I'm not sure," her mother said softly. Wiping her hands on a towel before walking to the door, she opened it just slightly. Enough to see two officers standing on her porch. They weren't familiar faces, which was strange for a town this small. Both wore calm expressions, but their eyes moved quickly, scanning everything: her face, the hallway behind her, even the shoes near the doormat. "Ma'am," one of them said, holding a clipboard with a stack of papers. "We're here regarding an urgent matter concerning your daughter." Her breath caught for a moment. "My daughter? What matter?" "It's a protective custody order," the second officer explained. "We need to take her with us for temporary supervision. There were some concerns filed earlier today." Her first instinct was to demand proof, to question them, to shut the door and shield her daughter behind her. But she forced herself to breathe. She didn't want to make a scene in front of her child. "There must be a mistake," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I haven't received any notice about this." The officer with the clipboard nodded slowly. "These things happen quickly sometimes. Please step aside so we can discuss this inside." She didn't want them inside her home. Everything inside her wanted to say no. But she also knew how it looked to refuse an officer's request. She opened the door a little more and let them step in. The moment they entered, her daughter walked toward her, holding her favorite stuffed bear. The smaller officer bent down with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey there," he said softly. "We just need to talk to your mom for a moment." Her daughter squeezed her mother's hand, confused but not afraid. "Not yet." The officers asked routine-sounding questions: where the child went to school, usually took care of her, whether there were any recent issues at home. The mother answered calmly, though inside she could feel something tightening. Their questions didn't line up with a standard welfare check. They weren't asking the right things. They weren't acting like people responding to a real concern. Then came the moment that cracked everything. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, holding up the papers again, "we'll need to take your daughter with us today. You'll be contacted once the situation is reviewed." Her daughter's eyes widened. "I don't want to go." The small voice trembled, and the mother absolutely knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't normal. It wasn't standard. Something was deeply wrong. She stepped between the officers and her daughter. "I'm not handing her over without knowing exactly what this is about." The taller officer's expression tightened just slightly. "If you refuse," he said calmly, "we'll have to escalate this." She noticed something, then teeny details that other people would have missed. The badge number on one officer's shirt didn't match the pattern used in their county. The documents he held had a faintly blurred seal, as if photocopied too many times. and the radio on his belt wasn't tuned to the frequency she knew local officers used. Her pulse slowed. Not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't official. She had spent years avoiding situations like this. She didn't want to think like her old self. She didn't want to analyze threats or read body language or measure distances. But old training never really left the mind, it only slept. And in that moment, it woke. Still, she had to be careful. She couldn't risk making the situation worse for her daughter. She forced herself to stay calm and gentle. "You can't take her," she said quietly. "Not until someone explains exactly what's going on." Both officers exchanged a look. Then the shorter one spoke in a tone meant to sound reassuring, but carried something cold beneath it. "Ma'am, it's better if she comes with us without trouble." Her daughter hugged her leg tighter. The mother bent slightly, resting her hand on the girl's hair. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled just a bit. The taller officer stepped forward. Perhaps thinking her silence was a sign of surrender. "Please hand her over." For a split second, everything in her froze. She could not let them touch her daughter. She could not allow them to leave the house with her. But there were two of them, and any sudden move could create panic or danger. She needed to stay composed. She needed to protect her child without escalating into anything physical. She was capable of defending them both. Of course she was, but she wanted no harm, no alarm, no chaos that could traumatize her daughter, so she stepped back and said, "Give me a moment to get her things." Her voice was calm. To calm. The kind of calm she used to use before stepping into situations that required every ounce of control. The officers agreed. "Of course," the shorter one said. She closed the bedroom door behind her and her daughter. Kneeling down, she held the girl's face gently. "Listen to me," she whispered. "You stay quiet. You stay close to me. I won't let anything bad happen to you." "What?" Her daughter nodded. Though she didn't fully understand, the mother quickly grabbed a small backpack from the closet. Placing a few essentials inside, not because she planned to hand her daughter over, but because she needed a moment to think. A moment to plan. She could hear the officers murmuring to each other in the living room. Something in their voices told her they were growing impatient. She grabbed her phone and discreetly snapped photos of the documents left on the table. Every detail mattered. Every clue could lead her to the truth later. When she stepped back out, she held her daughter's hand tightly. But the moment she entered the room, she realized the officers had moved. They were closer to the door, closer to blocking her in. "Ma'am," the taller one said, "we need to go now." Before she could react, the shorter officer gently but firmly took her daughter's arm. Her heart cracked. "Don't touch her," she said, her voice shaking for the first time. "It's procedure," he replied. Her daughter looked back at her, eyes filling with fear, without raising their voices, without creating chaos. The officers walked her daughter out the door. She followed them, her steps numb. Her breath sharp in her chest. The car waiting at the curb wasn't a standard patrol car. It had no markings. Nothing that identified it as part of local law enforcement. The mother knew then, absolutely. Painfully knew that her child was being taken by people who were not who they claimed to be. Her voice trembled one last time. "Please don't take her." But the door closed, the engine started, and the car pulled away. She stood barefoot on the porch, the cool air pressing against her skin. Her daughter's cries faded with the sound of the car, and in the empty silence that followed, something in the mother shifted. Not anger, not panic, not helplessness. Something older, something sharper, something she had buried deep. Her peaceful life was over the moment that unmarked car turned the corner. Her daughter was gone, and she would not stop. Until she brought her back, the house felt painfully quiet after her daughter was taken. Every corner looked wrong, as if the whole place had lost its warmth the moment the officers closed the door behind them. The toys scattered on the living room floor, the half-finished drawing on the table, even the tray of cookies on the counter, all of it felt like pieces of a life that no longer belonged to her. She stood still for a long moment, trying to steady her breath. The silence was heavy, pressing against her chest, making it hard to think. but she forced herself to stay focused. Falling apart now wouldn't bring her daughter back. She needed a clear mind. She needed to understand what had just happened. She replayed the scene in her head, every detail, every movement, every expression on the officers' faces. Her mind worked through it the way it used to during missions she never spoke about. She didn't want to think like that again, but she couldn't avoid it anymore. Something terrible had happened, and she was the only one who could fix it. She walked to the table and picked up the papers the officers had shown her. She already knew they were fake, but now she studied them closely. The seal looked smudged, almost stretched. The signature didn't match the style used in official county documents. The badge numbers were mismatched. Nothing about it looked real. She grabbed her phone and zoomed into the photos she had taken earlier. Each picture revealed more problems: misspelled words, a wrong date format, and a strange watermark that didn't belong to any government office. This wasn't sloppiness. It was deliberate. Someone had taken time to make these documents look official enough to fool an average person. But they weren't meant to fool her. She stepped back, rubbing her fingers over her forehead. Why her? Why her daughter? Had someone recognized her? Had her past somehow caught up to her? Or was this something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with who she used to be? She began pacing the room, thinking through every possibility. Her daughter had no enemies. Their life was quiet. She didn't socialize much, didn't attract attention. The bakery was small, and most customers were regulars who barely noticed her. Nothing about her simple life connected to the kind of people who forged custody papers and pretended to be officers. She stopped walking when another thought hit her. Maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe the officers had done this before. Maybe her daughter wasn't the first. The idea made her stomach drop. She leaned against the wall, gripping the edge of a shelf to keep herself steady. She couldn't let her mind go too far into the dark. She needed answers, not fear. She walked to her room and opened the small lockbox she kept hidden in the closet. Inside were a few old items, nothing dangerous, just small pieces of her past she hadn't been able to let go of completely. Her old ID card, an outdated radio scanner, and a tiny notebook filled with emergency contacts from years ago. She picked up the radio scanner and turned it on. It crackled with static at first, then slowly picked up local frequencies. She listened carefully, hoping to hear something, anything, that could give her a clue. But the local police channel was calm, routine. If the officers who took her daughter were part of the department, there would have been chatter. Someone would have mentioned a custody pickup, but there was nothing. This confirmed what she already knew. These men weren't real officers. They were pretending. And whatever they wanted with her daughter wasn't something legal or harmless. She sat on the edge of her bed, gripping the scanner tightly. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of the situation. Her daughter was out there somewhere, afraid and alone. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't a loud child. She was gentle, the kind who hid behind her mother's arm when strangers visited. The thought of her being taken away by people she didn't know made the mother's chest tighten painfully. She pushed herself up. She needed more information. She needed to move. She grabbed her jacket, slipped on her shoes, and headed outside. The street looked exactly the same, peaceful, calm, almost sleepy. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved politely and never imagined danger lurking in broad daylight. But today, danger had driven right down the middle of the street, and no one even noticed. She walked to the spot where the unmarked car had been parked. She crouched and touched the ground. There were faint tire marks leading down the road. The direction didn't matter much. There were multiple routes the car could have taken. She needed a better plan. She headed back inside and pulled out her laptop. She searched for the county records office and looked up any recent reports involving child protection services. Nothing unusual came up. She checked local news. Still nothing. Whatever happened to her daughter wasn't part of any official action. She opened a private search tool she had used during her past works, something most people didn't even know existed. It allowed her to cross-reference badge numbers, officer names, and public safety rosters. She typed in the numbers she remembered from the uniforms. The results confirmed her fear. No such officers existed. She sat back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Everything pointed to one truth. Someone had planned this. Someone had chosen her daughter specifically. Someone had forged documents and sent people who knew how to act calm, collected. An official, she wasn't dealing with amateurs. She needed to get ahead of them. Fast. Her next step was the sheriff's office. Not to accuse anyone, but to observe. She needed to see if the real department had any idea what happened. She grabbed her keys and headed out. When she reached the sheriff's office, she walked in with steady steps. She approached the front desk calmly. The woman at the counter greeted her politely. "I need to ask about a custody order that was carried out a little while ago," she said gently. The woman frowned. "Custody order? There haven't been any today." Her heart skipped. "Are you sure?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The woman checked her screen. "Nothing for this area. Nothing under your address either." The mother nodded slowly, pretending to be confused instead of alarmed. "Two officers came to my home," she said. "They had papers, names, or badge numbers?" the woman asked. She gave the badge numbers she had memorized. The woman typed them in. A moment later, she shook her head. "Those aren't ours." The mother felt her throat tighten. "Then who were they?" she whispered. "I don't know," the woman replied, worry now creeping into her voice. "But if people are pretending to be officers, we need to know. Can you describe them?" She carefully described the two men, leaving out nothing. The woman wrote everything down. She seemed genuinely concerned, but the mother still couldn't trust anyone yet. "Someone from our team will contact you immediately," the woman said. The mother forced a small, polite nod. "Thank you," she said before leaving. As she stepped outside, she noticed something. Across the street, a black car was parked with tinted windows. It wasn't unusual on its own, but something about the way it was positioned made her uneasy. She slowed her steps, pretending to check her phone, and glanced in its direction. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure inside watching her. She didn't react. Instead, she walked casually to her car, got inside, and drove away. She checked her rearview mirror carefully as she turned onto the main road. The black car stayed where it was, but the uneasy feeling followed her all the way home. When she reached her living room again, she felt the same emptiness waiting for her. The small tower of wooden blocks her daughter had been building earlier still stood in the middle of the floor. She sat beside it, touching the top block gently. Her daughter had been here just hours ago, laughing, playing safe. She took a deep breath and focused. She couldn't afford to break down. She had to move forward. She opened her notebook of old contacts and flipped through the pages. Most numbers were outdated. Some people had retired. Some had moved away. But one contact stood out, someone she trusted deeply, someone who owed her more than a few favors. She dialed the number. To her surprise, the line connected. A familiar voice answered, cautious but calm. "It's been a long time." "It has," she said quietly. "I need help." The voice didn't hesitate. "Tell me what happened." She explained everything, every detail she had pieced together. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, the voice said, "This wasn't random. Someone planned this for a reason. And whoever they are, they knew what they were doing." She felt a chill run through her. "What do I do now?" She whispered. "You find out who they are," the voice replied. "And you start where they least expect you to look." She asked, "At the place they used to take her?" Her heart pounded at the thought. "I don't know where they took her." "You will," the voice said. "You've always been good at finding the truth." She closed her eyes, letting the words steady her. "You're not the same person you were back then," the voice continued. "But you haven't lost what made you strong. Use it. Your daughter needs you." She ended the call and sat in silence. For the first time since the officers took her daughter, she felt a spark of something other than fear, determination, quiet, steady and stronger than anything she had felt in years. She stood up, grabbed her jacket, and looked around the room one last time. Everything she loved had been taken from her in a matter of minutes. But she wasn't helpless. She wasn't broken. She was ready, and she would not rest until she found her daughter. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the darkness itself was pressing down on her. She sat in her living room with only a small lamp turned on, staring at the photos she had taken of the fake documents. Every detail, every smudge, every strange mark felt like a piece of a puzzle she needed to solve. Her daughter's absence echoed through the house, turning even the smallest sound into a reminder of everything she had lost. But she refused to let fear guide her. She had spent too much of her earlier life learning how to stay calm in situations that were far worse than this. Those old skills were returning, whether she liked it or not, sharp, clear, and unavoidable. She studied the documents again. One watermark caught her eye. It wasn't fully visible in the photo, just a faint pattern near the corner. She zoomed in. The shape looked familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. It wasn't from any government agency she recognized. It looked more like a training academy logo, or maybe a private security group. Something about it felt wrong. She reached for her notebook. Flipping through old pages filled with codes and notes from years ago, she didn't use most of the information anymore. But she kept it because she knew life had a strange way of dragging people back to the things they thought they had left behind. After several minutes, she found something that made her sit up. She compared the symbols carefully. The pattern was almost identical to a symbol used by a training facility that had been shut down years ago. She remembered hearing about it through whispers from people she worked with. It wasn't a public place. It wasn't even officially acknowledged. It had been used privately for special training, military security, and sometimes people with unclear motives. When it was closed, there were rumors of misuse of power, unlicensed activities, and people operating outside the law. The facility wasn't far from her town. Her heart began to race. Was it possible that whoever took her daughter was using that old place as a base? It made sense. It was abandoned, isolated, off the main roads. The perfect place for people who didn't want to be found. She grabbed her jacket and keys. She couldn't wait any longer. Before stepping out, she paused at the doorway. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I'm coming for you." Saying it out loud made her resolve even stronger. The night air was cool, brushing against her face as she walked to her car. The sky above her was quiet, a vast dark canvas with only a few stars. She drove through empty streets, checking her mirrors carefully. No strange cars followed her. No headlights lingered behind her. She kept her speed steady, her mind focused. The facility was about 20 minutes outside town, hidden down a long dirt road that barely looked used. The tires crunched softly against the gravel as she made her way down the narrow path. Trees on either side leaned in, their branches hanging like they were trying to hide the road. Her headlights finally revealed the old gates at the entrance. They were rusty and partly open. Tall fences surrounded the property, though parts were broken or leaning. A faded sign hung crookedly on one side. The paint was chipped so badly she couldn't read the words. The place looked dead, abandoned for years, but she knew better than to assume. She parked her car a short distance away and approached the gate on foot. Every sound around her was clear: the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, the soft wind brushing the grass. She moved quietly, keeping her steps light. When she slipped through the gate opening, she felt her senses sharpen. The training center had once been a cluster of buildings, barracks, a main office, equipment rooms, and several practice fields. Most of them looked dark now, their windows broken and walls worn. But one building stood out. The old training hall at the back had a faint light coming from inside. Her heartbeat quickened. Though her face stayed calm, someone was here. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. She crouched behind an old concrete barrier, studying the area. The building with the light had large windows, though most were covered with old shutters. A single window had a sliver of brightness seeping through. The door wasn't fully closed. She could see shadows moving inside. She watched quietly for several minutes, till she finally saw them. Two figures walked past the window. She recognized their movements immediately, the way they held themselves, the way they observed the room around them. They moved like trained men, not random criminals, professionals, or at least men who had been trained at one point. Her stomach twisted when she recognized one of them. It was the taller officer who had come to her home, so they were hiding here. But where was her daughter? She scanned the building from different angles. There were no sounds of a child crying. No small movements. Nothing that hinted she was inside. That scared her even more. If her daughter wasn't here, then this place was only part of something bigger. She needed information. She needed to get inside quietly. She circled the building, moving from shadow to shadow. She checked each door, each window. Finally, she found a back window unlocked. The old frame was loose, and she lifted it carefully without making noise. Inside, the room was dusty and filled with old training mats. She crouched down, listening before taking another step. She could hear muffled voices somewhere deeper inside the hall. She moved silently along the wall, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She kept her breathing steady, just like she had been taught. Her footsteps were soundless against the concrete floor. She reached a doorway and peeked through. She could see the two men standing near a table with several folders spread across it. They looked focused, talking quietly. She listened. "Did anyone see you?" the shorter man asked. "No," the taller one replied. "She didn't make much trouble." People like her always break down. They look tough, but fall apart the moment things get serious. The mother's jaw tightened. They had no idea who she truly was. "What about the girl?" the shorter one asked. The taller man leaned back against the wall. "She's with the others. They'll move her soon." The mother felt her heart stop for a second. The others? How many children were involved? "Did you check the papers?" the shorter man continued. "Yeah, the ones we used looked real enough." "No way she'll figure it out." The mother almost let out a bitter laugh. They had underestimated her completely. The shorter man sighed. "When do we get paid?" "By morning," the taller one answered. "But we need to stay low until the pickup." She stepped back from the doorway, her mind racing. They were part of something organized, something involving more children. And the phrase pickup suggested the children were being moved somewhere else soon. She couldn't let that happen. She scanned the room again. There was another door at the far end. Maybe the children were kept there. She needed to check, but first, she needed a distraction. She slipped out the way she came and circled the building again. She picked up a small rock and tossed it toward a distant fence. The sound echoed just enough to draw attention. Inside, she heard one of the men grumble. "What was that?" "I'll check," the taller one said. She watched as he stepped outside, scanning the area with a flashlight. She waited until he moved farther away, then slipped back inside through the window. The shorter man was alone now, still looking at the documents. She didn't want confrontation. She didn't want anyone hurt, but she needed to get to the back room. She moved quickly, silently. The shorter man had his back to her. She slid behind a set of shelves, inching along the wall until she reached the second door. She tried the handle. Locked. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. Of course it was locked. She looked around. Nearby, she saw a small keyring on a hook near the table. The man still wasn't looking her way. She waited for him to turn his back again. When he did, she moved. She stepped out quietly, reached the hook, and grabbed the keys without making a sound. Her old training made her movements fluid and controlled. She returned to the door and carefully searched for the right key. Her hands were steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Finally, one key fit. She turned it slowly. The door clicked open. She slipped inside and closed it softly behind her. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on a desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, files with photographs, lists of names and maps marked with routes. She picked up one of the files and her breath caught. It wasn't just her daughter. There were multiple children listed, photos, ages, notes about when they were taken and where they were moved. This wasn't random. This was a planned operation. She flipped through the papers until she found the file with her daughter's picture. Seeing her little face on a document made her chest ache. But she swallowed the emotion and stayed focused. The file listed a location, not the training center, a different place. A temporary site where the children were kept before being moved. She memorized the address. Just then, she heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming toward the door. She quickly returned the papers, turned off the lamp, and slipped behind a tall cabinet. The door opened, and the shorter man stepped inside. He flipped on the light and looked around, confused. "Why is this door open?" he muttered. He took a few steps inside, scanning the room with suspicion. The mother held her breath, staying completely still. After a moment, he sighed and closed the door again, locking it, when his footsteps faded. She waited a few more seconds before moving. She slipped out through the window again and crouched behind a wall. Watching them from a distance, the taller man had returned, and the two were now arguing about whether they should move. Location sooner. She didn't care about their plans anymore. She had what she needed, Anne. A DDRESS, a place where her daughter was. She hurried back to her car, keeping low and silent. As she reached the driver's seat, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had taken her first real step toward getting her daughter back. The night around her felt different now, not empty, not hopeless, filled with purpose. She started the engine. The night felt heavier than usual as she drove toward the old training ground. The road was empty, and the trees on both sides looked dark and still, almost as if they were watching her. Her heart was steady, but her mind kept jumping. Between memories of her daughter and the faces of the officers who took her away, she tried not to let her anger lead her. Anger made people sloppy. She needed to stay sharp. She parked her car far from the gate so no one would hear the engine or notice a vehicle too close. She stepped out quietly and breathed in the cold air. It reminded her of nights long ago when she trained for missions that allowed no mistakes. Back then, she followed orders. Tonight she followed only one thing, her love for her child. She walked through the grass slowly, taking each step as if the ground might speak back. The place looked abandoned from the outside, but she could tell it wasn't. A thin light leaked out of the cracked window on the second floor. Someone was definitely inside. She knelt close to the ground, studying the building. The routine of analyzing, planning, and predicting brought her some calm. She was good at this. Too good, maybe. But those skills were hers, and tonight they mattered. She reached the shadow of the back wall and touched the rough concrete. It felt old, but strong. She scanned for security signs. There were none, which meant they trusted secrecy more than real protection. That was careless. She pressed her back against the wall and listened. No footsteps. No talking. Just the low hum of a small generator somewhere inside. She moved along the wall until she reached a broken service door. Someone had forced it open earlier, but then tried to pull it back into place. It wasn't locked. She pushed it gently and slipped inside. The room was dark, dusty, and filled with broken chairs. It smelled like metal, paint, and something old that hadn't been touched in years. Her steps were careful. The floor was scattered with small debris, but she avoided every piece like she could see in the dark. Her eyes adjusted slowly. A soft glow came from the hallway, and she followed it, stopping every few seconds to listen. She heard nothing yet. She reached a corner where the glow grew brighter. She leaned slightly to see what was ahead. Two men stood near a table, talking quietly. They weren't the officers who took her daughter, but she recognized their uniforms, the same department, same group. Her pulse tightened, but her mind stayed calm. She looked around for anything she could use. A wooden stick leaned against the wall. Not much, but she took it. She waited. She listened. When one man turned his back and walked toward the far end of the hallway, she moved. One breath, one step, one silent motion. She came up behind the other man, touched his shoulder, and as he turned, she pressed a finger to her lips. He froze. Not because she scared him physically, but because something about her presence made him feel small. She whispered softly but firmly, asking where her daughter was. The man shook his head, too frightened to lie convincingly. She told him she wasn't here to harm him if he stayed honest. His voice trembled as he pointed toward a stairwell that led to the basement. She could see the fear in his eyes. She didn't feel sorry. This was not about him. She whispered one more warning, don't call for help. Then she stepped around him and went to the stairs. The stairwell was narrow and steep, and each step creaked slightly. She placed her feet on the edges to make less noise. The air grew colder as she went down. At the bottom, she paused. A faint sound drifted through the basement hallways, someone pacing. She followed the noise, her senses opening wide. When she saw the officer who took her daughter, everything inside her shifted. She recognized his walk, his voice, even his careless confidence. He didn't know she was there. He didn't know she was close. She stepped out from the shadows and spoke, his name with a calmness that made him spin around in shock. He stared at her like he had seen a ghost. She stood tall, steady, and silent. Her eyes locked onto his. He tried to speak first, pretending he had done nothing wrong, pretending she'd misunderstood everything. But she kept walking toward him at a slow, controlled pace. He stepped back. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. She told him to stop lying. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Every word carried weight. She asked him where her daughter was. He hesitated, and she knew he was afraid of giving a direct answer. She kept moving closer until she was only a few steps away. He reached for his radio, but she shook her head. He froze again. She didn't need to threaten him. Her presence did the work. Finally, he told her that her daughter was safe, locked in a room upstairs. He said it quickly, trying to soften the truth, trying to avoid the responsibility. She didn't show her reaction on her face, but her heart ached hearing it. She had imagined many scenarios, but hearing the confirmation hurt in a quiet way she didn't express. Before she could take another step, another officer entered the hallway. This one looked tougher, more confident, and ready to challenge her. He saw her standing there and demanded she leave. But she didn't move. The two men exchanged looks, unsure of what she might do. She told them she wasn't here to fight, and she didn't want to harm anyone. She only wanted her child back. Her voice softened as she spoke, but it stayed firm and unbreakable. The second man stepped closer like he wanted to test her. She stood still and let him say whatever he wanted. He tried to use his authority to push her back, but each word he said felt weaker than the last. Something about her calmness unsettled him. She told them she knew everything about the forged documents, about the hidden rooms, about their part in a larger problem. She told them she had enough proof to end their operation right now. The first man's eyes widened. He knew she wasn't lying. The second man grew nervous but tried to hide it. He told her she was trespassing, breaking the law. She gently reminded him that they were the ones taking children from families. He had no answer for that. They didn't know what to do anymore. They had power, but not the courage to face what they had done. She could see it. She could feel it. She took one small step forward. They took 2 steps back. Then she told them they had one choice left: return her daughter peacefully or face consequences they weren't ready for. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Her control frightened them more than anger ever could. The first man finally broke. He said he would take her to the room where her daughter was. She told him to go ahead and open the way, but she stayed behind him, watching every move. When they reached the stairs again, the building seemed even quieter than before, as if it was holding its breath. The man led her down a hallway to a small metal door. He hesitated only a moment, then pulled out a key and unlocked it. She stepped inside slowly, hoping, praying, trying to prepare herself for whatever she might see. The room was empty. Her breath caught for a second, not out of panic, but out of a deep shock she didn't let take over. She turned around and looked at the man. She could see the panic rising in his eyes, too. He didn't expect the room to be empty. Before she could speak, another sound echoed down the hallway, running footsteps from upstairs. She listened closely. It wasn't fear. It wasn't chaos. It was urgency. Something had changed. Something had happened upstairs. She stepped out of the room and looked toward the stairs, her heart steady once again. She was close. Too close to stop now. Whatever waited for her at the top of those stairs, she was ready for it. The sound of footsteps from the floor above made her stop at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, everything felt still around her, like the building itself was holding its breath. She looked toward the stairway, listening closely. The steps were quick, but not chaotic. Someone was moving with purpose. Someone who knew something had changed. She took one slow breath, steadying herself the way she had done many times in the past. Then she moved toward the stairs. The two officers behind her didn't dare follow. They stayed frozen near the empty room, whispering quietly as she walked away. She placed her hand lightly on the stair railing and moved upward, her steps silent and controlled. Her heartbeat was steady, but her mind was running fast. Her daughter wasn't in the basement. That meant she was somewhere else in the building, somewhere close. When she reached the top of the stairs, she paused again. The hallway looked longer than before, the dim lights flickering softly. She could see the outline of another person at the far end. The figure moved quickly, turning into a different hallway, as if trying to avoid being seen. She followed. She didn't rush, but her walk had purpose in every step. She reached the hallway corner and looked around it slowly. The person had vanished into one of the rooms. She listened carefully and heard a faint click. A door closing, she approached the room and placed her hand on the knob. She waited a few seconds, listening for any sound inside. She heard someone breathing softly, as if trying to stay calm. She pushed the door open gently. Inside, a woman stood near a table stacked with files. She wasn't dressed like an officer. She looked caught between fear and guilt. When she saw the mother standing in the doorway, she froze and lifted her hand slightly, showing she meant no harm. The mother asked her where her daughter was. The woman hesitated, her voice shaky as she said she wasn't part of the plan. She said she only handled paperwork and didn't know where the children were moved. But the mother could tell she was hiding something not out of malice, but out of fear. She stepped closer and spoke softly, reassuring the woman that she wasn't here to hurt her. She only wanted the truth. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she finally admitted that the girl had been moved to another room earlier that night. She pointed toward the north wing of the building. The mother thanked her quietly and turned to leave. As she stepped back into the hallway, the woman whispered that she hoped the mother would find her child. The mother didn't look back, but those words stayed with her. The north wing was darker, quieter, and seemed more isolated than the rest of the building. The hallway felt colder, and the air smelled dusty. She moved slowly, alert to every sound. The rooms along the hallway were mostly empty, with old equipment and broken furniture. Then she saw a door at the very end of the hall, with a locked metal panel on it. Something about that door felt different, hidden, secret. She walked toward it, her footsteps echoing softly. She touched the panel and felt a faint vibration. It wasn't just a lock. It was an electronic control system. But someone had been careless. The panel wasn't closed properly. A wire stuck out slightly. She examined it closely and found a simple weakness. The system was old and poorly maintained. After a moment of careful work, she managed to bypass the lock without making a sound. The door clicked open. She pushed it slowly. Inside the room, a small light glowed in the corner. And there, on a narrow bed, sat her daughter. The child looked up, her eyes wide, then suddenly filled with tears. The mother stepped inside with slow, gentle steps, not wanting to startle her. The child ran into her arms, holding onto her with a grip that felt like it came from every fearful moment. She had lived since being taken. The mother wrapped her arms around her tightly. Closing her eyes for a second, she whispered that everything was going to be okay now. The child cried softly, pressing her face against her mother's shoulder. After a moment, she lifted her daughter into her arms and stepped out of the room. The hallway felt different now, not cold, because she wasn't alone anymore, but she still had to get them both out safely. When she reached the main hallway, she heard voices, more people, different from the officers she had confronted earlier. She held her daughter close and moved quickly, making sure they stayed hidden in the shadows. She didn't want her daughter frightened by more strangers. As she reached the back exit, she noticed flashing lights through the cracks of the door. Blue and red reflections danced across the walls. She stepped closer and looked outside. Federal vehicles, her old contact had arrived. She let out a slow, breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The timing couldn't have been better. She opened the door carefully, shielding her daughter from the bright lights, and stepped outside. Agents rushed toward her, their faces serious but gently relieved when they saw the child safe in her arms. One agent she recognized nodded at her with quiet respect. She didn't need to explain anything. He knew. The building was quickly surrounded. The officers inside were taken into custody one by one. Some tried to escape, but they didn't get far. Others came out with their hands raised, too overwhelmed to resist. The mother stood near one of the vehicles while the medic checked her daughter. The girl held her hand tightly the whole time, refusing to let go. The mother kept brushing her daughter's hair from her face, whispering soft words of comfort. The agent approached her and asked how she was. She said she was fine, just tired. He told her they had found documents inside that proved everything she had uncovered. He said her courage had saved not only her own child, but many others who had been taken. It's the same way. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at her daughter, who was slowly calming down now that she felt safe. The agent asked if she needed anything. She shook her head. She didn't need anything else tonight. She only needed her daughter. She carried her child to her car with slow steps. The air outside felt softer than it had earlier, and the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. Dawn was still far away, but the first hints of morning were there. She placed her daughter gently in the passenger seat and wrapped a warm jacket around her. The girl held her mother's hand again, refusing to let go even for a second. The mother smiled softly and brushed her thumb over her daughter's knuckles. As she drove away from the building, she glanced at the rearview mirror one last time. The flashing lights grew smaller until they disappeared. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel heroic. She felt like a mother who had done what any mother would do, fight for her child in the quietest, strongest way she knew. Her daughter leaned closer, resting her head against her mother's arm. The mother whispered that they were going home now, that everything was finally over. For the first time in days, the mother let herself breathe freely. The road ahead felt open, calm, and safe. They would heal, they would rest, and they would move forward together. As the sun began to rise behind them, she kept driving with a steady heart, holding on to the one thing that mattered more than anything else in her world, the little hand wrapped tightly around hers.